Midnight in Manhattan. Rain falls like whispered secrets against the glass doors of a five-star hotel where golden light pools across the polished marble floor. A middle-aged black man steps inside his faded gray coat, still carrying the dust of the road, a little girl asleep on his shoulder like a tired angel. In one hand, a frayed backpack. In the other, a bouquet of white lilies quietly dying. He asks for one room, nothing more, but the receptionist's gaze slides from his mud-stained sneakers to the wilting petals, and her smile freezes into ice. "I'm sorry, sir. We're fully booked tonight." Moments later, a couple draped in silk and Armani drifts past him and is handed the keys to the presidential suite. The girl stirs, lifts her head and whispers, "Daddy, did we do something wrong?" He says nothing. Then he does one quiet thing, and the entire lobby stops breathing. The revolving door sighed shut behind him, muffling the hiss of the rain into a distant memory. For a moment, Elijah Monroe simply stood there, letting the warmth of the lobby settle over his shoulders. 6-year-old Zara was still fast asleep against his neck, her dark curls catching the warm chandelier light. One small hand curled around the strap of his backpack, the other clutching a ragged brown teddy bear that had long ago lost an eye. Around her wrist hung a thin silver bracelet, and on it, engraved in letters so small only a father's eye could find them, was a single word: Naomi. The lobby was all hush and polished stone. Somewhere overhead, a crystal chandelier scattered fractured gold across the marble. A pianist at the far end of the hall drew slow, mournful notes from a grand piano, as if the room itself were mourning something it could not name. Elijah's eyes, tired and rimmed with red, lifted toward the far wall, and for a heartbeat he stopped breathing. There, framed in dark walnut above the fireplace, hung a black-and-white photograph of a woman in her 30s. She was laughing, her hair lifted by a wind caught forever in silver tones. Her eyes so bright they seemed to look right through the lens at him. Elijah's jaw tightened. His throat moved once. Then he blinked and moved on as if the room had not just taken a private piece of him and pinned it to the wall. Zara stirred on his shoulder, rubbing her eyes with the back of her fist. She looked up at the gilded ceiling, then at the ivory pillars, then at the shimmering chandelier above them, and a small crease formed between her brows. "Daddy," she whispered, her voice still thick with sleep. "Why doesn't this hotel look like our hotel in Chicago?" Elijah's hand, dark and warm and calloused from a life that had built itself out of nothing, found the back of her head, his fingers threading gently through her soft brown curls. He pressed his index finger to his lips and smiled a small, tired smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Shh, sweetheart," he murmured. "Not tonight." She nodded, trusting him the way only a child trusts a father, and laid her cheek back against his shoulder. The wilted white lilies in his hand trembled faintly with the motion. Only hours earlier, those lilies had been part of a larger bouquet, pale and perfect, in the back seat of his car as he drove north through the gray afternoon. Half of them now rested on wet grass beneath the sprawling oaks of Oakhaven Cemetery, beside a marble headstone that read in quiet letters, "Naomi Monroe, beloved wife and mother." The rest he had kept the way he kept every small thing she had ever touched. Zara had crouched beside him in her little red coat, her small palm flat against the cold stone. "Mommy," she had whispered, her breath fogging in the late afternoon chill. "I miss you so much." Elijah had not trusted himself to speak. He had simply wrapped his arm around his daughter's shoulders and let the silence carry what his voice could not. 3 years. 3 years, and it still felt like the first day. They had driven straight from the cemetery into the city. No reservation. No plan beyond the one he made every year on this date, to walk through the doors Naomi had once dreamed into being and see with his own eyes whether her dream was still alive in the people she had left behind. That was why he had come dressed like this. Dusty coat, faded jeans, sneakers still marked by the soft earth of the cemetery. No suit, no watch, no entourage, just a man and his daughter and the ghost of a promise. And here is something worth pausing on the small detail that the world rarely sees. A man like Elijah, a black man who had built an empire from a single diner job and a young woman's belief in him, had learned long before he ever wore a tailored suit that the world would read his clothes before it read his face, and his face before it read his name. He had spent decades teaching himself not to flinch when waiters reached past him to hand the bill to whoever was lighter at the table, not to explain himself in elevators, not to apologize for taking up space he had paid for. And every year on this one night he chose deliberately to step back into the version of himself the world had once tried to dismiss, just to see who in his own house would still recognize a human being when there was nothing shiny attached. A soft chime snapped him back to the lobby. He crossed the marble floor toward the reception desk, shifting Zara carefully so she wouldn't wake, and set the frayed backpack down with a quiet thump. Behind the counter stood a young woman with sleek blonde hair twisted into a practiced knot. Her posture so precise it looked rehearsed. Her name tag glinted beneath the warm lights, Brittany Hollis. Her smile when it appeared was the kind of smile that arrived first and waited to see whether the rest of the face should follow. "Good evening," Elijah said quietly. "I'd like a room for my daughter and me. Just one night." Brittany's eyes moved over him the way a customs officer inspects a suspicious bag. They traced the marks on his sneakers, the frayed sleeves of his coat, the dying lilies trembling in his grip. Her smile shifted into something colder, polite in shape, glacial in temperature. "I'm sorry, sir," she said, clipping each word as if they cost her money. "We're completely booked tonight." Elijah gave a small, understanding nod. He was about to thank her and turn away when the heavy front doors opened again and a gust of rain-scented air swept in behind him. A man in a charcoal Armani suit strode through the lobby with a woman in ivory silk on his arm, a diamond glittering at her throat. They didn't even break stride on their way to the counter. Brittany's entire face transformed. The smile bloomed warm and radiant as if a switch had been flipped inside her. "Mr. and Mrs. Ashford, welcome back to the Monroe Grand. Your presidential suite is ready, and we've sent the champagne up just the way you like it." Keys changed hands in the space of a breath. The couple drifted toward the elevators without a glance at the man in the gray coat standing 3 feet away. Elijah turned his head slowly. Zara had opened her eyes at the sound of voices and was now staring wide and confused at the counter. He looked back at Brittany. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice still soft, still unhurried. "I thought you said you were fully booked." A faint flush rose beneath Brittany's makeup, then hardened into something brittle. From the other end of the counter, a narrow-shouldered colleague named Tyler Banks drifted closer, a smirk already forming on his thin lips, sensing entertainment. "Those guests had reservations, sir." Brittany answered, her tone suddenly businesslike. "Do you have a reservation?" "I can book one right now," Elijah said evenly. "Any room, whatever you have." Brittany let out a short, airless laugh. It was the kind of laugh that did not invite company. "Sir, I'm afraid our rates may not quite fit your budget. There are several more affordable motels a few blocks from here. I'd be happy to point you in the right direction." The words landed in the lobby like a dropped glass. A woman in a mink coat waiting near the concierge desk turned her head. Somewhere behind Elijah, a businessman lowered his phone. Elijah did not react. He only shifted Zara's weight gently on his shoulder as though shielding her from something in the air. Against the far pillar, a thin figure stepped partly into view. Margaret Sullivan, the senior receptionist, on her break. A line had formed between her brows as she listened. She took one step forward, then another, then stopped herself, her mouth pressed into a tight, troubled line. Everyone in the building knew Brittany had been hired as a favor to someone on the executive board, and Margaret, who needed her paycheck more than her pride, lowered her eyes and stayed where she was. Near the gilded column by the entrance stood an older man in a dark blue security uniform, silver at his temples, back still soldier straight despite his 60 years. His name was Walter, and he had worked in this lobby for longer than most of the staff had been alive. When Elijah had first walked through the door, Walter had lifted his eyes, and for one slow second his whole body had gone still, as if his heart had forgotten how to beat. Elijah had met his gaze across the lobby, and with the smallest shake of his head, asked him wordlessly, unmistakably, to stay silent. Walter had obeyed his throat, working his gloved hand tightening around the radio at his belt. He was obeying still. Zara tugged gently at the collar of her father's coat. Her voice, when it came, was small and uncertain. "Daddy, let's just go. I'm tired." Elijah looked down at her. For one long moment, something inside his chest tilted. He could turn around right now. He could walk her out into the rain, find a quiet place, carry her to sleep somewhere gentler than this. She was 6. She had already buried her mother. She did not need to watch the world prove one more time how cruel it could be to people who did not look like money. And then, in the stillness between one heartbeat and the next, Naomi's voice returned to him, soft, clear, as if she were standing at his shoulder. He heard it the way he had heard it years ago in the half-built lobby of this very hotel, when the two of them had stood together in work clothes and watched the first walls rise around them. She had slipped her hand into his and said very quietly, "Promise me something, Elijah. Don't ever let our daughter learn to bow to injustice. Not for anyone, not even for peace." He drew a slow breath. Then he lowered himself to Zara's level, set the wilted lilies gently on the marble floor beside his backpack, and took both her small hands in his. "No, sweetheart," he said, his voice low, steady, sure. "Not tonight. Tonight, Daddy wants you to learn something important." Zara's brown eyes searched his face. She did not understand, but she nodded because he was her father, and because somewhere deep in her small chest, she was already beginning to understand that the world was about to teach her a lesson it had never taught her before. And here, before the storm broke open, it is worth saying one quiet thing about what most of us would do in Elijah's place. Most of us would have left. Most of us would have whispered to our child that the room was too expensive, that the people inside were too busy, that we would find somewhere kinder down the street. We would have done it because that is what tired parents do at the end of long, painful days. We do not always have the energy to fight, and choosing peace is not always the same thing as bowing. But there is a particular kind of moment, the kind a parent only recognizes when it is happening, when leaving will teach the child the wrong lesson. When walking away will quietly hand a 6-year-old the unspoken belief that some people deserve to be welcomed and some people do not, and that she belongs to whichever group the world says she does on any given night. Elijah recognized that moment. He stayed not because he was angry, but because he loved her too much to let her learn the wrong thing in his arms. Elijah rose to his full height, and slowly he turned back toward the counter. Elijah's eyes settled back on Brittany with the patience of a man who had all the time in the world. He did not raise his voice or step closer. He simply stood there, and somehow his stillness filled the space between them more completely than any shouting could have. "I'd like to speak with your manager, please." Brittany's smile flickered. Tyler, who had drifted to her side like a moth drawn to a slow fire, leaned in and murmured something into her ear. The two of them exchanged a small, private glance, the kind of glance that assumed the man in front of them could not read what it meant. Tyler straightened and turned to face Elijah. His voice pitched loud enough for half the lobby to hear. "Sir, I'm going to ask you politely one more time. Please leave. This establishment reserves the right to refuse service to anyone." A small ripple moved through the lobby. Near the concierge desk, the woman in the mink coat lifted her chin and let out a thin, theatrical sigh. "Honestly," she said to no one in particular and to everyone at once, "it's getting so that anyone can just wander in off the street these days." Zara lifted her head off her father's shoulder. Her brown eyes, still bright with sleep, moved from the woman in fur to the man behind the counter, and then up to her father's face, searching it for some explanation the world was refusing to give her. Behind the pillar, Margaret Sullivan pressed her palm flat against the cool marble as if it might steady her. She had worked enough night shifts to know what she was watching. She had been trained by a woman named Naomi a lifetime ago when this hotel was still young, and its doors opened to anyone with the courage to walk through them. Every instinct she had was screaming at her to step forward, but the paycheck in her purse was the only thing standing between her children and an eviction notice. And Brittany Hollis was not just a colleague, she was someone's niece, someone's favor, someone untouchable. Margaret stepped forward anyway, only halfway. She caught Brittany at the edge of the counter and bent close to her ear, her voice dropping to a whisper so soft it barely disturbed the air. "Britt, be careful. You don't know who he is." Brittany brushed the warning off her shoulder like lint. "Margaret, please. I know exactly what I'm doing." Margaret straightened slowly. Her eyes met Elijah's for the briefest instant across the counter, a flash of apology, of shame, of something that might have been recognition beginning to stir. Elijah held her gaze for only a moment, then let her go with the smallest nod as if to say, "It's all right. Stay where you are. I understand." A polished pair of black leather shoes clicked across the marble behind him. The sound was brisk, assured, self-important. "Is there a problem here?" The man who appeared at Brittany's side was somewhere in his mid-40s, narrow at the shoulders, sharp at the jaw, with thin gold-rimmed glasses perched low on his nose. He wore a charcoal suit, a shade too expensive for his position, and he carried himself with the kind of borrowed authority that only truly convinces its owner. His name tag read, Richard Whitmore, Night Manager. Brittany's relief was almost audible. She leaned toward him, her voice dropping into the rehearsed tone of someone who had practiced her version of events the whole time she was waiting for him to arrive. "Mr. Whitmore, this gentleman is refusing to leave. I've explained several times that we're fully booked, but he keeps insisting." Richard raised one hand to stop her. He did not look at Elijah. He spoke about him. "Sir, my staff has already given you our answer. The Monroe Grand has standards and we expect them to be respected. I would appreciate it if you would kindly vacate the lobby." For the first time that evening, something shifted beneath the surface of Elijah's face. It was not anger. It was something quieter and infinitely more dangerous. When he finally spoke, his voice was lower than before, the edges of it smoothed by a deep, tired patience. "Standards," Elijah repeated softly. "What sort of standards, Mr. Whitmore? Standards of dress, or standards of how you decide whether a human being deserves a roof over his child's head?" Richard blinked, caught off guard by the gentleness of the question. He recovered quickly, adjusting his glasses with a small, impatient push of his knuckle. "You're disturbing our guest, sir. I'll ask you one last time to leave. After that, I'll have no choice but to call security." At the word security, Zara's small body stiffened against Elijah's chest. Her lower lip began to tremble. 2 fat tears rolled down her cheeks before she even understood that she was crying. "Daddy," she whispered, her voice breaking. "Daddy, I'm scared." Elijah drew her in closer. He pressed his lips to her forehead, and for one breath, then two, he simply held her there, letting her feel the steady rhythm of his heartbeat through the fabric of his coat. "It's all right, baby," he murmured against her hair. "Daddy is right here. Nothing is going to happen to you, I promise." Zara drew back in his arms and looked at him. Then, with the sudden, unexpected courage that sometimes lives inside very small children, she turned her whole body toward the counter and faced Brittany Hollis. Her voice, when it came, was thin and shaking, but every word inside it rang clear as a struck bell. "Excuse me, miss." Brittany's gaze snapped down to the child in surprise, as though she had not quite registered until that moment that Zara drew a shuddering breath. Her small fingers tightened around the eyeless teddy bear. "My daddy is the best man in the whole world. He reads me stories every night and he kisses my forehead when I'm sad. He doesn't yell. He never yells." Another tear slipped down her cheek, and she brushed it away with the back of her wrist, the way she had seen her mother do once long ago. "So why do you hate him?" "What did my daddy do wrong?" Pause here for just a moment. Because if there is one line in this whole story that ought to be carved into a wall somewhere, it is the question a 6-year-old just asked into a lobby full of grown adults. What did my daddy do wrong? She did not ask why he was being treated this way. She asked what he had done to deserve it, because at 6 years old she still believed the world only punished people who had earned punishment. That belief is the most fragile thing a child owns, and it is usually the adults closest to them who are tasked with protecting it as long as they can. The cruelest thing Brittany did that night was not refusing a room. It was forcing a little girl to ask out loud whether her father was a bad man when every cell in that little girl's body already knew the answer was no. And here is something else worth noticing quietly before the moment moves on. Zara was a small black girl asking that question in a marble lobby in Manhattan, in a country where black girls have been asking some version of that same question for a very long time. She did not yet know the history behind the silence she was breaking, but the silence knew her. Her father knew it too. That is part of why he stayed. Something cracked very faintly in Brittany Hollis's composed face. For 1 second, the mask slipped. Her perfectly lined eyes flickered. Her mouth opened and a small, uncertain sound started to form in the back of her throat. It might have become an apology if she had let it. It might have become a beginning. Instead, her jaw tightened. She lifted her chin and looked somewhere above the child's head, as if finding her carefully over Zara's shoulder made the question disappear. "Mr. Whitmore," she said briskly, "I think it's time to call security." Richard was already lifting his wrist to speak into it. From the far corridor came the soft double beep of a radio, and moments later 2 younger guards appeared at the edge of the lobby, their hands resting casually on their belts as they approached. Against the gilded column beside the entrance, the older security officer, Walter, took one single step forward. Then he stopped himself. His breath came shallow through his nose. The hand that gripped the radio at his belt had gone white at the knuckles, and a bead of sweat traced a slow, terrible line down his temple. He was looking across the lobby now, not at the young guards, not at Richard Whitmore, but at Elijah Monroe. And his eyes were saying, "Sir, please let me speak. Let me end this." Elijah's eyes met his across the distance, and once again, with the smallest, most private shake of his head, he answered, "Not yet, Walter. Not yet." Walter closed his eyes for a single heartbeat and lowered his head. His jaw worked once. He obeyed. The lobby had gone strange and quiet. Phones had begun to rise from pockets. A young woman near the pillar was already filming. Behind her, a man in his 50s in a black suit, broad-shouldered, calm, the kind of businessman who had seen too much of the world to be easily impressed, watched the whole scene unfold over the rim of his whiskey glass. His name was Reeves, and he had stayed at the Monroe Grand 4 times a year for the last 11 years. He did not lift his phone. He did not smile. He set the whiskey down slowly on the side table, folded his arms across his chest, and waited to see what kind of man he was really looking at. Before the next moment lands, take this with you from the first part of the night. Most of us will never own a hotel. Most of us will never have the power to turn around in a lobby and rearrange someone else's life with a single sentence. But every single one of us, every single day, stands at some smaller version of that reception desk. We decide whose email gets answered first. We decide whose question we take seriously and whose we wave away. We decide which neighbor we greet by name and which one we pretend not to see. The standard a person carries does not begin in a uniform. It begins in the quiet, unwitnessed seconds when no one is filming and no one will ever know. And the smallest gift a parent, a teacher, a stranger can give a child is to let them grow up in a world where the adults around them keep choosing over and over to see. The 2 young guards reached Elijah. They did not touch him. They stood a respectful half-step back, one at each shoulder, waiting for the signal. Zara was sobbing openly now. Her small shoulders shook against her father's chest, and she had buried her face in the side of his neck so she would not have to see the men who had come to take them away. Richard Whitmore lifted his chin. There was satisfaction in the corner of his mouth now, the faint, ugly curl of a man who believed he had won something. "Last chance, sir." Elijah looked around the lobby. He looked at Brittany, still rigid behind the counter. He looked at Tyler, who had taken one small, nervous step back. He looked at Margaret, who could not meet his eyes. He looked at the young woman filming, at the woman in the mink coat, at the two young guards beside him, at the dozen or so guests who had stopped their own lives just to watch his fall apart. Then slowly, he lowered his head. His shoulders dropped. He bent down and reached for the frayed backpack at his feet and the wilted lilies beside it, like a man accepting something he could no longer fight. Richard exhaled. The relief came out of him almost as a laugh. "There you go," he said. "Finally, sir, you understand." Elijah straightened. The backpack hung loose in his hand, but he did not turn toward the door. He turned instead toward the far wall. The lobby, sensing something it did not yet have a name for, began to quiet. Elijah walked slowly across the marble, Zara still held close against his shoulder, the wilted lilies trailing from his hand. The young guards took half a step after him, then stopped, uncertain whether to follow. Richard opened his mouth and closed it again. Even Brittany's sharp, rehearsed face slackened into confusion. Elijah stopped at the fireplace. He looked up for a long moment at the black and white photograph of the laughing woman in the dark walnut frame. He set the backpack and the lilies down gently on the marble hearth. Then with both hands he lifted the portrait off the wall. A soft, audible gasp ran through the lobby. He turned, holding the photograph in front of him like a shield, like a question, like a sword. He walked back across the marble, and the crowd parted for him without knowing why. He stopped in front of Richard Whitmore and held the portrait up at the manager's eye level. "Mr. Whitmore." Elijah's voice was quiet, but every word cut through the lobby with the clean precision of glass. "Do you know who the woman in this photograph is?" Richard's face had drained of color. His mouth opened. His eyes darted left, right, anywhere but at Elijah's face. When his voice finally came, it was half an octave higher than it had been a minute before. That's Mrs. Naomi Monroe, the wife of the founder of..." Elijah reached one-handed into the inside pocket of his faded gray coat and drew out a weathered brown leather wallet. His movements were unhurried. He opened it carefully, as a man opens a sacred thing, and slid from behind a crease of worn plastic a single photograph. It had yellowed at its edges with age, and its corners were softened from being touched too many times over too many years. He held it up beside the portrait, the same woman, the same laugh, the same impossible brightness in her eyes. Only now, in the smaller photograph, she was wearing white, and her hand, pale and slender, was folded into the dark, steady hand of a much younger Elijah Monroe, who was looking at her as though he could not believe she had said yes. Elijah did not speak for a long moment. When he did, his voice had gone soft, almost tender. "That is my wife, Mr. Whitmore, and today is the anniversary of her death." The lobby did not gasp this time. The lobby stopped breathing. Brittany Hollis took one small, involuntary step backward from the counter. Her hand rose to her throat. Her face had gone the color of old paper. Tyler Banks was staring at nothing, his mouth slightly open. The woman in the mink coat had lowered herself very slowly onto the edge of a gilded chair. The young woman filming had forgotten she was filming. Richard Whitmore made a sound. It was not a word. It was the sound a man makes when the floor he has spent his entire career standing on suddenly turns to water beneath him. And then from the far side of the lobby came the slow, firm sound of polished shoes crossing marble. Walter walked out from behind his column. His back was straight. His gloved hands were steady. He crossed the lobby with the measured dignity of a man who had been waiting for this moment for 3 long years. And when he reached Elijah Monroe, he stopped, brought his heels together, and bent his silver head in a deep, unhurried bow. "Welcome home, Mr. Monroe. It's been 3 years." Zara lifted her tear-streaked face from her father's shoulder. She blinked at the old man through wet lashes, and though she did not understand what was happening, she understood that something very important had just begun. Elijah reached out with his free hand and laid it briefly on Walter's shoulder. His voice, when it came, was rough at the edges. "Thank you, Walter. Thank you for keeping faith." The revolving door at the front of the lobby turned with a soft, breathy hush. heels sharp, measured, unmistakable, crossed the marble in long, unhurried strides. The woman who entered wore a tailored navy coat that had almost certainly been made for her and her alone. Her silver-streaked hair was pulled back into a severe, elegant knot. A single pearl rested at her throat. She had been upstairs in a private dinner meeting on the 20th floor when the alert from the front desk lit up her phone, and she had taken the service elevator down 2 at a time, still in her evening clothes. She did not stop to look at the staff, at the guests, at the 2 young guards still frozen half a step from Elijah. She walked the length of the lobby with her gaze fixed on one man alone. And when she reached him, she bent her own head in a bow so deep it traveled all the way to the marble. "Mr. Monroe." Her voice was low, controlled, perfectly composed, and inside it was the softest tremor of pure professional terror. "I came as fast as I could. I am so deeply sorry I was not here sooner." Behind the counter, Brittany Hollis made a small, strangled sound and gripped the edge of the marble with both hands, as though it were the only thing in the room still holding her up. Elijah Monroe did not raise his voice. He simply looked slowly at the woman who had just arrived at Patricia Lawson, the chief executive of Monroe Hospitality Group, at the hotel manager, with his gold-rimmed glasses trembling on the bridge of his nose, at the receptionist whose mask had finally fallen from her face. And in the terrible silence of that lobby, he lifted his daughter a little higher in his arms and prepared to say the words that would change every life in the room. If there is one thing worth carrying out of the second part of this night, let it be this: the truth of who someone is almost never arrives the way we expect it to. It does not walk in wearing a crown. It does not announce itself at the door. It arrives in dusty sneakers with a sleeping child on its shoulder and dying flowers in its hand. And the people who learn to recognize it anyway, without proof, without status, without a portrait on the wall to confirm their suspicion, are the only people in any room who will ever truly be at peace. Because they will never have to live with the cold, late-night memory of the moment they looked straight at a human being and chose not to see one. Patricia Lawson straightened from her bow. She kept her gaze on Elijah Monroe, and in the deep stillness of that lobby, her composure, Clear's throat, became the composure of the entire room. "Mr. Monroe," she said quietly, "the building is yours. Please tell me what you need." A soft, rippling sound moved through the lobby, not words, but breath. The woman in the mink coat lifted one gloved hand to her mouth. Somewhere at the edge of the marble floor, a champagne flute slipped from someone's fingers and shattered with a bright, crystalline crack. No one looked toward the sound. Elijah set the black and white portrait gently on the reception counter. Naomi's laughing face turned upward toward the chandelier. He settled Zara a little more securely against his shoulder. When he finally looked up, his gaze moved past Patricia and came to rest squarely and without cruelty on the man in the gold-rimmed glasses. The man who had built the Monroe Grand from the ground up began to speak. 47 hotels across 4 continents. Elijah said, his voice unhurried, almost conversational. This was the first. My wife and I poured the last of our savings into this building 20 years ago, and everything about it, the stone beneath your feet, the chandelier above your head, the portrait you just watched me take off that wall, was her idea. Every year on the anniversary of her death, I come here. Not to inspect, to listen, to see whether the standard she left behind is still alive in the people who work inside her dream. Richard Whitmore's hands had begun to shake so visibly that he pressed them flat against the counter to steady them. Behind him, Brittany Hollis had sunk slowly onto the tall chair behind the desk, her shoulders collapsing inward as though some invisible structure inside her had finally given way. Elijah's eyes found her. He walked to the counter with the same quiet patience he had carried from the moment he first stepped through the revolving door, and he stopped only when there was nothing but a meter of polished marble between them. "Ms. Hollis." Brittany's head jerked up. Her mascara had already begun to run in 2 thin, ugly streaks down her cheeks. "You did not turn me away tonight because you had no rooms," Elijah said softly. "You turned me away because you looked at my coat, and at my shoes, and at the flowers in my hand, and you decided that I did not deserve to stand in this lobby. You decided that before I opened my mouth." Brittany's lips parted. No sound came out. "Let me tell you something about the woman who built this place." Elijah reached out and laid one hand very gently on the edge of the walnut frame. Before she became Naomi Monroe, she was Naomi Brooks. She waited tables in a diner off Route 22 in New Jersey. She wore a uniform 2 sizes too big because it was the only one the owner would give her, and her shoes had holes in the soles that she filled with folded paper because she couldn't afford new ones. The first time I met her, she was wiping coffee off my sleeve and apologizing for something that wasn't her fault. I was a young black man in dusty work boots walking home from a construction site with $12.70 in my pocket, and she was the first person in that whole long day who had looked me in the eye when she spoke to me. He looked up from the frame. His eyes held Brittany's without letting them go. "She built this hotel," he said, "so that no one who walked through these doors would ever be made to feel the way she had been made to feel every single day of her life before I met her, and the way I had been made to feel for most of mine. And tonight, Ms. Hollis, you took the one thing she built her whole life to prevent, and you did it to a man holding a sleeping child." Brittany bent forward over the counter. Her shoulders shook. The sound that came out of her was not the sound of someone pretending to be sorry. It was the sound of something inside her being broken open for the first time. Elijah turned slowly to Richard Whitmore. "Mr. Whitmore, you are a manager. The standard of this hotel was placed in your hands, and you chose tonight to use it as a weapon against a guest who did not fit your idea of what a guest should look like. You are dismissed effective immediately. Please return your badge to Mrs. Lawson on your way out." Richard's mouth opened and closed once. He reached slowly for the lanyard around his neck, and his fingers were trembling so badly that he had to try twice before he could lift it over his head. Patricia Lawson stepped forward and took it from him with a nod so small it was almost invisible. As Richard began his slow walk toward the staff corridor, the broad-shouldered man in the black suit rose from his armchair by the fireplace. Reeves crossed the marble with the unhurried stride of a man who had seen the world and knew exactly what he was looking at. He stopped Richard at the mouth of the corridor, and his voice when it came was low enough that only those closest could hear it. "I've stayed in this hotel 4 times a year for 11 years, Mr. Whitmore. I've waited all of those years to see someone in this lobby do what that man just did. It's a pity you aren't the one who did it." Reeves stepped aside. Richard walked past him without looking up. No one watched him go. Elijah turned back to the counter. "Ms. Hollis." Brittany lifted her face. Her careful makeup was gone now. What was left was something younger than she had looked all evening, a woman barely out of her 20s with red-rimmed eyes and a mouth that had forgotten how to pretend. "Please," she whispered. "Mr. Monroe, please. I'm so sorry. My mother is sick. She's in a hospital in Queens. I needed this job. Please, I will do anything. I'll apologize on camera. A small hand tugged at the hem of Elijah's coat. He looked down. Zara's face was still wet with tears, but she was no longer crying. She was looking up at him with the enormous, serious eyes of a child who had suddenly understood something no one had taught her. "Daddy," Zara whispered. "Daddy, she's crying. Please don't make her sad anymore. Okay?" Elijah's breath caught in his chest. For one long moment, he could not move. He only looked at his daughter, at the silver bracelet around her small wrist, with her mother's name engraved on it, at the dark curls that belonged to him, at the warm brown eyes that belonged to Naomi, at the quiet, impossible mercy living inside a body that carried both of them. He knelt down very slowly on the marble floor of the lobby he had built for his wife, and he kissed his daughter on the forehead. Then he rose and faced Brittany Hollis. "You will not be fired tonight, Ms. Hollis." His voice had softened, but it had not lost any of its edge. "For the next 6 months, you will be reassigned to housekeeping. You will change the sheets. You will scrub the bathrooms. You will carry other people's luggage, and you will smile when they do not say thank you. Every single day, you will look at the people you thought you were better than, And you will learn what it feels like to be invisible to someone who believes they matter more than you. At the end of 6 months, if your supervisor believes that the woman who walks into this lobby is not the same woman who stood behind that counter tonight, you may apply to return to the front desk. Brittany's tears were falling freely now, but she was nodding over and over, her whole body trembling with something that was no longer shame and not yet gratitude, but was slowly, painfully becoming both. "This is not charity, Ms. Hollis," Elijah said. "This is a second chance, and I want you to understand something. I am not the one giving it to you. My 6-year-old daughter gave it to you. Do not waste it." Brittany sank her forehead onto the counter and wept. Elijah stepped back. His eyes found the thin figure of Margaret Sullivan, still standing half-hidden behind the column where she had been standing all evening. He beckoned her forward with one small motion of his hand. Margaret came wiping at her own eyes with the back of her sleeve. "Margaret," Elijah said quietly, "I have watched the footage from this lobby every month for 3 years. Every month. And in every month of footage, there is one person who greets the man in the torn jacket exactly the same way she greets the man in the tailored suit. One person who walks the woman with 3 plastic bags to her room as carefully as she walks the woman with matching luggage. One person. You." Margaret's hand rose to her mouth. "Tomorrow morning, Elijah said, you will take the front office. You are the new head of guest services at the Monroe Grand. Congratulations, Mr. Monroe. I don't know what to—" "You don't need to say anything, Margaret." Elijah's voice had grown warm for the first time that night. "My wife saw you long before I did. She would be very proud." Margaret closed her eyes. A single tear ran the whole length of her cheek, and she did not wipe it away. Elijah turned finally toward the gilded column by the entrance, where the old security officer still stood with his silver head bowed and his gloved hand steady on the radio at his belt. Elijah crossed the lobby to him, and when he reached him, he did something that no one in the building had ever seen the owner of the Monroe Grand do before. He wrapped his free arm around the old man's shoulders and pulled him into an embrace. 3 years, Walter." Elijah's voice had gone hoarse. 3 years you have stood at this door and kept her faith. That ends tonight. Tomorrow morning you step into Mr. Whitmore's office and you will be the new head of security for this entire building. You have earned it 10 times over." Walter's shoulders shook just once beneath Elijah's arm. When he straightened, his eyes were wet, and he did not try to hide them. "Thank you, Mr. Monroe." "Thank you, sir. I kept faith because she asked me to once. I told her I would. I could not break my word to Mrs. Naomi." Elijah smiled for the first time all evening. It was a small, tired, grateful smile, and it was the smile of a man finally letting something go. Patricia Lawson stepped forward at last. She extended her hand to Elijah, and in her palm rested a small brass key on a simple leather fob. Elijah took it without a word. He walked to the fireplace. He lifted the black and white portrait from the counter and placed it with great care back onto the wall above the mantel. Naomi's laughing eyes settled once again over the lobby she had built. He bent and retrieved the wilted white lilies from the marble hearth. Then he shifted Zara in his arms, brushed a strand of hair from her forehead, and walked toward the private elevator at the far end of the lobby without looking back. The young woman who had been filming lowered her phone slowly. The crowd parted for him without a sound. Reeves, still standing near the corridor, inclined his head as Elijah passed a small silent salute between 2 men who had just recognized each other for the first time. The presidential suite had been designed by Naomi Monroe 20 years ago. She had chosen every curtain, every picture, every color in the wallpaper. Elijah laid Zara down on the wide bed and drew the blanket up to her chin. He set the wilted lilies in a tall glass beside the bedside photograph of the woman they both loved. Zara's eyes were already beginning to close. "Daddy," she murmured, her voice drifting with sleep. "Did Mommy see us tonight?" Elijah bent and pressed his lips to her forehead. His eyes were too full to answer quickly. "She saw every second of it, sweetheart," he whispered. And she was so proud of you. She was so proud. Zara smiled in her sleep. 1 month later, the video a young woman had forgotten she was filming had been shared more than 40 million times under a hashtag she had not chosen and could not have predicted hashtag Monroe lesson. Monroe Hospitality Group announced a new training program for every employee in every one of its 47 hotels, a program called the Naomi Standard. Every new hire, from front desk to valet to general manager, now spent their first week rotating through every position in the building, changing sheets, washing dishes, carrying luggage, standing at the door in the rain. In the lobby of the Monroe Grand, a young woman in a housekeeper's uniform knelt beside an elderly guest who had dropped her shopping bags, gathered the fallen oranges one by one, and smiled up at her with the kind of smile that had taken 6 months and a great deal of pain to learn. Behind the front desk, a woman named Margaret welcomed a family in faded jackets with the same radiance she would have offered to a king. Elijah Monroe walked through the lobby with Zara's small hand in his, her tiny dark fingers folded inside the warm, steady curve of his own. At the fireplace, Zara stopped and tilted her face up toward the portrait above the mantel. "Daddy," she said softly, "Mommy is so pretty." Elijah crouched beside his daughter. He looked up at the laughing woman on the wall and then down at the little girl who carried her eyes and her father's quiet, stubborn courage in equal measure. "Mommy was more than pretty, sweetheart," he whispered. "She taught Daddy something very important. And tonight, you taught it to Daddy all over again. Never judge a person by what they look like on the outside, because you will never know who they truly are. And more than that, you will never know how one small act of kindness from you might change the rest of their life." Zara squeezed her father's hand. Above the mantel, Naomi Monroe went on laughing forever in a lobby full of people who had finally learned how to see. "So here at the close of all of it, take this home with you and let it travel with you out into your own week. We will not all build hotels. We will not all hang our beloved on a wall. But every one of us will, before this week is over, meet someone who is having the worst night of their life and arrives in front of us looking like nothing in particular. A tired customer. A confused old man asking for directions. A young woman crying quietly in a corner of a coffee shop. A stranger at the back of a long line. The world will tell us very gently that it is not our problem. The world is wrong. Be the person who looks up. Be the person who slows down. Be the person who hands back the dropped wallet, who holds the elevator one more second, who answers the question instead of pretending not to hear it. You will never know which of those small choices will turn out to be the one a child remembers for the rest of her life. You will never know which of those small choices will turn out to be the one your own child remembers for the rest of theirs. Kindness costs nothing, but it's worth everything. And the truest measure of any of us in the end is not how we treated the people we knew were watching. It is how we treated the ones we believed no one would ever ask us about.